Hello, everyone. Thank you for showing up on this last day of FCC. I know everyone's tired. The conference has been hectic, which is a good thing. Today I'm going to talk about vote markets and why they're actually a driving force in governance innovation. It's a controversial topic, and that's why we love it, right? So, do I have a... Oh, there's no? Okay, sure. First, a bit of information about myself, so you understand that this talk will, of course, be biased. I'm one of the co-founders of Paladin. I used to be a banking lawyer, went from law to crypto really quickly. And we work in our specialized protocol at Paladin around governance. We believe that governance is one of the most important innovation about crypto. And we're going to talk a bit further about this in the next slide. And we've been building vote marketplaces and looking into governance infrastructure for the past 2.5 years. Our core and long-term goal is to democratize activism by building a governance engine. And the goal of this talk is basically to explain to you what we're trying to build. What's this governance engine for the first time? Okay, so let's start a bit by explaining the vision, what we're trying to do, and why is crypto one of the most interesting governance opportunities. We talk a lot about the Leviathan, which is basically nation state, the global structure that's holding everyone together, right? It's coordination. And crypto is an opportunity to reinvent the social contract without a nation state. So it's huge because it means we're reinventing human coordination. It's also very scary, so no one will ever agree on anything because it means that we're totally reinventing the way we're basically interacting with each other. So it seems very dangerous and seems very scary. What's really cool is that if you like to nerd out around governance, it's basically a playground for governance. So everyone who's interested in governance is probably going to gravitate around crypto because they have new opportunities. Before, you needed to like take a PhD, have some politics, find you impressive, and let you experiment a bit. Now you can just code like 10 lines of smart contracts and experiment with your new coordination idea, which is great. The second, I think, is that if you are in crypto, you kind of have a duty to experiment, but do it in a profitable manner, in the way that just doing something like for 10 days, having people impressed, sometimes depositing funds to do it and just disappearing after that, it's not a responsible way to build sustainable things, and you're not going to be able to do long-term stuff. The problem with governance is that it doesn't happen in a day. You need probably decades to build something really resilient. So you need to actually create sustainable product in general, and that's what we've been trying to do. The second thesis, and that's probably the most important one for me, it's that with crypto, we're unbundling governance. When you look at innovation, it's basically cycles of bundling and unbundling, which means like we're, for example, having actors that are going to eat all of the market share, and then they're slowly going to be disrupted by smaller actors. And what we've seen is that over the past 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years, nation states have gobbled all of the responsibility and the needs for coordination of our human society. Now, I think we're at an inflection point where we're going to start seeing microservices in DeFi and crypto and in general that are going to slowly unbundle all of these social needs. And it's super scary, but it also means that we're at probably one of the most interesting times for governance after Athens and their governance experimentation 2,000 years ago. We're already starting to see transparent organization, right? Which is the whole point of DAOs. We're starting to see automation, right? And what I find really interesting around gauges and vote markets is basically the fragmentation of this decision making. And this is the beginning of the unbundling we're talking about here. And the last part, as I mentioned before, it's about sustainability. It's inherently hard to build a governance project and to be able to do it in a sustainable manner. Why? Because when you add monetization, you add friction. When we're at lower than 5% participation in crypto in general, and even in TradFi or traditional governance, we already have trouble with participation, how can you expect people to come in and participate if they have to pay for it? So it's really hard to find a way to monetize what you're doing and to find a way to sustainably do it. The solution in the last bull market was you raise money, and then you're like, I'm going to build, sometimes get traction, and raise again, or release a token. But you're not making revenue, so you're not finding. So the only way you're going to actually scale is through donations, which is not a sustainable model. And that's a big question we've been asking ourselves at Paladin. How do you add this monetization layer that's going to enable you to keep doing the experimentation, keep building, solidifying the stack over the next years? This is extremely complicated, especially because for most projects, governance is not a priority. It's like a secondary or tertiary product. And you're going to have governance tooling apps that are going to appear. We see a lot of them. Some will potentially be interesting, and I can't wait. But if you look at everything that's been successful, especially in DeFi, where we have our experience, it's only been built by major blue chip protocols that were doing this on the side for side projects that they needed. So Governor Alpha and Bravo is basically Compound doing their on-chain governance system. Snapshot was initially a bouncer project, etc., etc. It's always the same thing, and that's why I think it's very important to understand that we need large projects that are going to keep experimenting around governance, and this is why we built Paladin and the governance engine. So, to give you an idea of what we just said, this is kind of justifies the vote markets, right? We've already seen people selling voting power in TradFi. It's kind of a theoretical nightmare because shareholders are like split in different exchanges, custodians, etc. So it's super hard to know who has what in real time. So most of the time you have double shares that are voted at every general assembly. What's extremely interesting is that in crypto, we don't just have a global decision-making power, right? You can have utility behind a token, for example, on Curve and on an exponential number of projects. So imagine that you can't just sell like decision-making, but you can sell specific utility, which means you're basically fragmenting the governance token. And that's what we try to build with our vote markets. The second, as I mentioned, is that it's a wild west of experimentation. No one has an idea where governance will head up. We need a lot of new things to appear. So there are non-trivial opportunities to build some interesting apps and potentially primitives. And the last, probably not the least, is that vote markets are provocative because they're scary, right? You're selling vote, governance should not be sold. It's an obvious explanation. We actually talked about publicly Paladin 2 years ago at FCC, and 2 weeks later, on Vitalik's blog, this post appeared. So we talked with him. We have no idea if this was a consequence of it, but we know it's provocative and we know people think about it a lot. And that's good, because vote markets are not what people expect them to be. And they're built onto, I'm going to give you a bit of numbers to understand. It's not something that's trivial, not a small topic. They've been appearing, we were one of the first on Ethereum on mainnet in September 2021. But since then, the market has grown a lot. We, of course, are not alone on this. The market was like, I think we did around, the market did something like $150 million of volume last year. Right now, we're a bit lower. But in ETH terms, it's actually slightly higher, something like 2 million a week, so a bit above 100 million a year right now. There's over 80 plus incentive campaigns that are done on vote markets right now, literally this week, by 40 projects on 5 protocols. So it's something significant. It's something that's going to keep scaling from what we see, because there's a lot of new projects. Specifically to DeFi, you can have Yearn and Alchemix, for example, who are adopting this gauge and vote market system. And we're seeing new utilities that are yet to be monetized, for example, which are very heated debates, for example, Eigenlayer. I'm not going to get into this today, or it's 1 hour of extra conversation. So why are these projects building on top of gauges? Why do they want to add it? And I think that's a really, really important topic. It's because it's the beginning of unbundling of governance, as I mentioned before. Basically, projects are starting to realize that you can't just have one governance, slap a token on it, and have everyone decide on everything. It's too much friction. Almost no one cares. You're going to have 3 people on your forum actually participating. And it's so inefficient and can be exploited a lot, which is why we see what some of you might know as the RV gang, who just come in projects which have a bigger treasury than their market cap, and they try to just redeem it. It defeats the point of creating a permissionless system. It's not. It's like an online stash of money that you can just come in, play the governance politics, and live with it. That's not the point of crypto. So gauges are interesting because they're an unbundling mechanism which is separating the emissions, could even be the treasury management, into a different subsystem of governance, specialized for resource allocation, which is going to ask for stakeholders to coordinate. And on top of this, we started building vote markets. Why are these vote markets important? It's not because it's market economy, far from that. It's what people expect, and that's why it's controversial. But the thing is, if you design your gauges and your market correctly, it's actually command economics. So basically very strict rules around the way these emissions are going to be spent, while you're letting an organic market be built on top of it. It's extremely efficient for 2 reasons. One, if you code it correctly, it's going to have the direct positive impact you want it to have. For example, Curve uses it to incentivize and attract liquidity. It can be much more technical and much more forward than that, right? And because it's kind of a free but closed market, it enables organic activity and growth around it. People can build around it, people can build stacks. like the vote markets, which enables a much more organic growth around the project and around its actual utility. So we're saying that I think the curve gauge is probably the most continuous, has the highest participation rate in any governance vote, because it's very specific and there's a subset of game that can be played with it. And it's still almost always benefic to the actual underlying protocol. That's the first reason. And the second, which is a bit different, is because we're splitting the utility, you're basically giving a choice for stakeholders to choose what they're going to participate in and what they're going to basically, instead of abstain, for example, delegate or sell. So you're basically fragmenting the decision-making process. And I expect project to split between 5 or 10 different types of utility or type of decision-making types in each DAOs. It's going to get way more complicated than this, and we're going to need a lot of infrastructure to do this correctly. So this is why it's interesting and very exciting. So after seeing all of this, I kind of want to shed a bit of light on our engine of coordination, which we use around our tokenomics. And the base idea is use the flywheel of a vote market and of potential future products to basically drive more governance innovation. The idea is pretty simple. It's just that you build a protocol that's going to be able to make revenue on top of market utility. For example, emissions. What you're seeing from this is that these fees, and we've redistributed around $5 million, I think, over the past 12 months, are going to be distributed to governors, and these governors are going to be able not only to extrapolate revenue from this, so suddenly you're paying stakeholders, but they're also going to be able to passively coordinate. Like anyone who's playing the curve gauges, for example, it doesn't really realize they're coordinating around trying to drive volume through curve, but that's literally what they're doing, and that's what other projects strive to design as a tokenomics. So they're coordinating, and the more they're coordinating, the more they're creating a higher quality organization design, theoretically either building a more efficient protocol, which raises its value, or unbundling more and more the governance system, which enables more designs to be built on top, which creates a flywheel where we're seeing more and more efficient projects that are going to simply keep on scaling. And we expect DAOs in general and protocols to move from like this very multi-sig type governance into something that looks a bit more not only like gauges but automated systems where people interact without really having to actively vote in the way they think, like reading a proposal. So they'll basically be enclosed into the choices that push the protocol forward. And that's the idea of our new tokenomics. If you want to have a look, you can actually scan the QR code. And more in general, our vision of Paladin and where we want to drive all of this. And the idea is that the flywheel is already going live. It's already working without any token right now. So we're actually adding some emissions potentially soon. We need to pass this through governance before, which will kickstart an even stronger flywheel. So that's our hope. Some final words just to finish around this. I hope I didn't confuse everyone on this. I don't think vote markets are the finality of anything in governance. I think they just should be used as a tool to basically kickstart a much stronger flywheel around governance participation and simply unbundling of the whole system. If you make them the finality, which some are actually doing right now, it's super dangerous because you're just trying to push a free market onto governance, and that's not the point. There needs to be direction. But if you drive it correctly and if you help project design gauges or new different types of governance systems in the right direction, I think it's going to be an extremely strong bootstrapping system. And the second is that I look forward to see a lot of people doing experimentation around how we can unbundle governance, because right now we have found a way to split treasury management and resource allocation, especially around emissions. There's probably a ton of others around governance, especially around grants, etc., that need to be explored and that need to be found, because today it's simply too archaic and too easy to exploit. So that's it for me. Thank you. I hope I've reconciled everyone with vote markets. If you have any questions, feel free. You can jump into in our Discord. We're always open for discussion. And that's it for me. Thank you.
There is some question. Thank you for the talk. If I understand correctly, the flywheel on governance, economical governance can be monetized so that projects have funds to, projects that do tools for economical governance have funds to maybe then, like you showed, um, develop other tools for better DAO organization. But some project like Snapshot and so on, how do they want to monetize their product? Because they are just focusing on the decision making, and I don't know how they can monetize that.
Well, as I mentioned, it's harder for DAO tooling to find the right business model, which is why we started with vote markets. We do have several clues. For governance infrastructure today, you have several opportunities. Of course, you can come in new project and ask for grants. It's not really sustainable though. You can ask for people to move on chain and take a small fee each time they vote. Or you can simply ask a subscription model to DAOs that are going to use it, right? There's tons of different models. The question is which one has the less friction and enables you to be the biggest. Like Snapshot today is the market leader. It's not without question. But what happens once they start adding that friction system, right? And I think that's a big thing we should look out on because it should happen eventually.
Thank you for the talk. A simple question. What's the problem with vote markets? Like, what are the risks, actually?
The risk is that if the rules are badly designed, and especially for the first one, it's likely, they can be exploited by creating negative loop. So for example, we actually saw this on Bouncer, for example, where they adapted the V-tokenomics and had people who understood the game much better than they did because they played it on Curve before, who were able to bring in large amount of capital, buy a lot of tokens initially, and simply create a loop where they could drive emissions, so create more and more loops where they just attracted a bigger and a bigger share of the protocol. So it's not inherently a bad thing, but it's something that they didn't have in mind when they did it, when they enabled the system. And that's kind of the whole point. You have to really design a system that's going to help you you have to have an idea of what you're doing. The problem that Bouncer had is that they already had too much of the circulating supply live compared to Curve when they started. So basically, instead of having Curve where you had low supply and the game was capturing emissions, you could actually buy a lot on the market with Bouncer, and then you could farm most of it. So there was a flow in the system. They found a solution in the end, which is all good, but it's interesting to see that a lot of the good systems always have a weakness, of course, nothing is perfect. But once they've been done once, they can be exploited because people will look at it, try to understand, and try to copy, which is why copies or forks hardly work in crypto on the long term, simply because people know how flawed the game is and they can just exploit it on the long term.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what does integration look like for an existing governance token for what you've built?
So for what we build today, we're really specialized around V tokens. So the framework that was pioneered by Curve, which is why I mentioned them a lot initially. We can explore some more. I think the biggest problem, which is true for any DAO tooling in general, is that there's no actual real framework of governance. Everyone wants to kind of do their own thing. Nothing is really proven. So there's a bit of governor alpha. There's a lot of snapshot. There's quite a lot of a growing number of V tokens. Today we're focused on V tokens. Hopefully we can do something in the later future about something a bit more long term. I don't think anyone should have a vote market. I want to be very clear on that. You have to place specific rules. For example, today with an emission system, this is where it's the most relevant. I'm extremely interested to see this unbundling of governance, as I mentioned before, and new utilities to appear and how they're valued. We initially started Paladin by trying to sell Aave, Compound, and Uni voting power, pure governance power. And we saw that there wasn't that much traction with it. People deposited, people were ready to sell, but not that many people were ready to buy. I think it's vote markets enable you to value the utility or a specific token just through their governance power, right? So it's also a gauging mechanism to understand how efficient you are in this market. There's a ton of things that are left to explore, honestly, and we can't build everything, right? So we're trying to focus specifically on this. But if projects have questions, please feel free to DM me, join our Discord, ask questions. We want to help.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, last question.
Hi, nice talk. Thanks for that. So, do you, of course, vote markets, DAOs, it makes sense, but do you see that there could be an element of using vote markets for more traditional organizations as well? Or do you only really see it working seamlessly with DAOs?
I do. When we build Paladin, we're saying we want to experiment in DeFi and eventually be able to offer these solutions also in TradFi, because basically a lot of problems that we're seeing on governance are not crypto problems, they're governance and social coordination problems. There's two problems with more traditional organizations. First, regulation. It's much harder to evolve in public markets, for example, than in DeFi right now. And the second is that I don't think we should experiment anything on the actual social layer, like nation states, for example. I think it's super dangerous. And let's experiment in our small bubble. Eventually, we can lose a bit of money, which is never advised, and we're being super careful. But it's much better than destabilize a country and put lives at risk, right? We don't have the power to do it, and it shouldn't be advised. What we're saying is that vote markets already kind of exist passively in TradFi. In the sense that index funds, investment banks, they already sell voting power. It's called shares lending. It's done at a very small part of the supply of these shares, simply because you can get shorted with this and you can get wrecked. So they're trying to be very careful with it. No one talks about it, but if you type shares lending on Google, you're going to see plenty of interesting documentation around it. And the second thing is that it's just hard. Like, it's expensive. It's a special business. Activism has been growing a lot. We're talking about activism shareholding. Shareholder capitalism lately. It's a trend that's been growing because regulation has also helped shape this. I think we're going to see much more movement around all these shares and around governance in traditional companies over the next 20 years. I think it's already doubled over the past 2 years.
Thank you for the talk.
Thank you all.